Power of Women podcast. Power of Women podcast.
Welcome back to part 2 of UK Drag here on the Power of Women podcast. This had to be a two-parter as there's so much talent out there to showcase. In 2021, drag is still predominantly a man's game. But as we learned in part 1, if drag is performing gender, then surely your actual gender doesn't matter. The beauty of the UK scene is that there's space for everyone. And with Victoria Scone entering RuPaul's Drag Race UK, the first female on the show, there's been much talk of women doing drag since. And in last year's POW Festival, we spoke to Ginny Lemon about the misogyny they'd heard over the years within the scene and decided that it was time we shone a light on the females and AFAB, assigned female at birth, kings and queens of the UK drag scene today. Let's get back into the podcast.
My name is Heather Duster. I am the Queen of Clean. My journey to drag started in 2016, where I was dabbling in the drag world, and I came up with the character Heather Duster while I was at drama school. And I did a practical dissertation, which was my first Heather Duster performance. And then in about 2019, I said, right, I'm going to do the damn thing and see how far I can go with Heather. And since then, I've just been doing all sorts.
She's big on TikTok, babes.
She's trying to be down with the kids on TikTok.
Yeah, I can relate to that. How do you define drag queen?
How do I define drag queen? I define drag queen as a presentation of hyper femininity through drag. That's what, for me, that's my drag as a identifying drag queen, is a performative presentation of femininity.
Gorgeous. And do you feel it's necessary to gender define a drag queen?
No, not at all. I go, drag artist for me is that's what you need to know. You know, the art form is drag and the rest you can just enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Fab. And which terms do you feel comfortable with, like bio queen or AFAB, or just female drag queen, or just drag queen, or just drag? I mean, it's kind of a journey, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a journey. Personally, I'm happy with drag queen, drag artist. I'm happy with AFAB queen. I think that's definitely a more personal term for people. But yeah, like you say, it's an absolute journey.
Yeah, I think, watching language evolve, it's a beautiful thing, isn't it? I think we're at a really interesting time, which is why I was really excited to make this podcast, because it's kind of like, we spoke to Ginny Lemon for a podcast in one of the early POWs last year, and they discussed misogyny that they'd heard in the scene. And I wanted to ask you, have you experienced or overheard or been around misogyny within the drag scene in your time?
Unfortunately, I have. Mostly from my perspective anyway, mostly audience members, or even just when I've been out and about in drag, not necessarily even someone who's been at the show. You just get talking to someone because, you're pretty eye-catching. And then people are intrigued but don't necessarily understand or know, and sort of say, actually, see what, most recently I did a waitress job in summer, and I was kind of telling my manager, and I said, oh, and I do drag. And he said, oh, but you can't really do drag though, can you? And I'm like, yeah, come on, Russell, you tell me more about how to do drag than, because you know, Russell,
Yes,
more than I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did like those kind of jobs there, and you'd overhear, or if you'd be in a sort of, shall we say, a more small town gay bar vibe, and there'd be that kind of like, I don't know, period jokes, or,
Yes.
ways of using femaleness, femininity, and it becoming the butt of the joke. In the same way that you would hear, I remember hearing this drag queen would always go, got any Irish in? Fuck off. And it'd be like, that was literally his first line. And you'd be like, what are you talking? Like, that's awful.
Yeah.
I'm from an Irish family, so it would always like hit me. I'd be like, Why is that? Why are you saying? I literally hadn't really heard that kind of little blatant racism and misogyny. And I think it's part of the reason we started Sink the Pink, to be honest, because it would just be like, this isn't funny or like necessary, or like, and you'd be like, why are these people getting booked? And I suppose it's like one of the reasons why I wanted to create a space that was completely for everyone and free, because why does there have to be rules, right?
Yeah,
So kind of what scene did you come up a part of? Like, what area of the country are you?
I grew up in Hastings.
Oh, great.
So really arty, fun, loads of events. We're always doing pub crawls, all dressed up, and kind of naturally lent itself. I mean, I was very close to Brighton, so we went to Brighton quite a lot when we were younger. So I had a fun scene growing up.
That's really nice.
Then,
so where are you now?
South London,
Yeah,
Tooting Broadway.
So you've sort of had that like seaside camp, safe space to be like, there's kind of the Britishness, isn't there, about drag? Like, I think the sort of drag that you do as well, like really, you're beautifully like accepting and kind, really like silly and classy at the same time. I think it's a really beautiful, you can tell I'm a fan.
Yeah.
And I think we've answered this, but I was going to say, like, is it a level playing field for female drag queens out there?
Yeah, I would say no. I feel, especially when I first started, I felt like I had to work twice as hard, and every number I came up with, I was going to the gig with like huge props, a massive costume for each, every single possible physical thing I could do to kind of prove my way that it was drag. But more recently, I've become way more comfortable with, not needing to kind of overdo it in terms of feeling like I'm worthy of the bookings,
Good. It's really good to hear. I think, I've watched that with TT Bang as well. Like, she'll turn up with all these incredible props and literally give so much more than her like, AFAB counterparts. And I think, the more there's an awareness, like how did you feel about Victoria Scone being on Drag Race?
It was lovely to see. It was so, so great to see. And I think that's something I've actually had more people say to me, or at least kind of maybe, what's a good example? Kind of family members that I'm not that close with, or
it sort of validates you.
Yes, those people are watching the show and seeing it who aren't necessarily in the scene who go to drag shows. And so then they're saying, oh, there was a woman on the show. And I'm like, yes, I know.
Yeah, so, it's about diversity across the whole scene, isn't it? Because I'll be honest, I found it more difficult finding female drag queens of colour as well for this podcast. And maybe I need to get out more, but is that something you've noticed as well?
Yeah, I have actually. I think, it kind of goes down in the circles into the kind of
the intersections.
Yeah.
How can we support the movement so it becomes more level?
You can follow us all on Instagram. When you go to the shows, then go to the producer and say, Heather Dudley was really, really great. You should book her more, not just as a one-off on that one lineup to prove that you are booking female queens. Just buying tickets, showing up, having fun, It's not hard work if it's fun work.
Totally. And what would your dream future of the drag scene look like?
I just see drag absolutely everywhere. I think, it's kind of I feel like we're in the kind of golden era of drag. Like, everyone wants drag, knows about drag, the Huns love drag. And so I just want to keep that momentum and take it even further, and just have it absolutely everywhere in every kind of sphere of life.
So if you were to like walk into your dream like queer utopia bar in like 10 years, or like if my kid who's now 4 years old, when he's old enough to go to bars, like what would it look like? What would be on the stage?
Oh, just a gorgeous group of incredibly diverse humans living their best lives, just having so much fun. And not one person sitting in the audience going like, "Oh, I didn't know that was a thing." Just being completely accepting straight away, really. I think
maybe that, like, not even any labels.
Yeah.
Interesting, isn't it? Because it's such a labeling time, and everyone is so obsessed with, like, what's your label?
That's so true. Just the space to enjoy and accept rather than have to categorize it.
Yeah. Because also it doesn't give you a lot of space for flexibility, does it? When you go, well, I'm pansexual, like non-binary, all really useful things. I'm one of those things. But like, yeah, but that's how I'm today. Like it's kind of it's evolution, isn't it? We sort of all find out more about ourselves. So it's almost like every label should come with a slight disclaimer. Like I'm also on my human journey, and I respect and give you space to do your human journey too.
Yeah, otherwise there's no space to grow, and like everything is fluid. Like it all has fluidity to all of those labels. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. I think that's the conclusion really for me, is that what I would want my kid's future to look like, is that he would have the space to like be flexible with all of those labels. Yeah. And just a huge amount of love and kindness at the center of it. It's so important that we talk about these things. I'm really grateful for your time. Is there anything that you would like to conclude really about, being a queen in the scene, or stuff that you've learned along the way, for anyone who maybe would like to get into drag?
Oh, yeah. I mean, just do it is the bottom line. Actually, I've had someone, a female queen, actually messaged me on Instagram the other day, who went to my course and sort of said, how do I get into it? And I think just go to as many shows as you can. Enter the competitions if you've got the energy. Go to scratch nights. That's how I did it. I just, every kind of opportunity to perform, I just took it, and then you just figure out what works for you, and you find what you love and how to do it best. But yeah, I guess I just want to say thank you to you as well for making these conversations. Like, it's such a great thing. And also, talking about myself. Oh no.
Have I got to like speak about myself? Like, women deserve this too, right? Like it's such an important, I think there's so much like patriarchy, even, it's in every aspect of life, isn't it? So like I certainly see it in the gay scene and in the drag scene, and like, I've always been, thank you for thanking me. It's really kind. But like, thank you for doing what you do. And I think that's why it's such, like, females in drag is such a beautiful space as well. And I think there's actually a lot that our male counterparts can learn from us in the way that we do things and the ways we support each other. And it is a shame that what mainstream society sees of the drag scene is reflected through an American TV show, because there's a lot more to it than that, particularly in this country. I think it's such a beautiful scene that that's what I want to highlight, and that's what I want to bring through. And I'm really proud that we can do that with this podcast and have the space to do it. And I hope men listen to it too, even though it's like the Power of Women podcast. Like, obviously, women are free when men are free, and men are free when women are free. That's the whole point of equality. And like, non-binary people are free, hopefully, with all of these things too. And having these conversations, particularly about the like labellessness. Like, I look forward to then we're not needing to have a women's festival or not needing to have a pride, but of course we don't live in an equal world. So I think it's absolutely fair that, like being director of a women's festival, I get men mainly go, oh, when's Men's Day? Or is there no like men's festival? And it's like, yes, babes, like it's November the 19th, but like, don't come and rain on our parade, because we would just want to have International Women's Day once a year. So all of these things are so important. And it's a real honour to bring through some drag sisters. I'm beautifully proud of you, and I think it's just such an exciting time for us. So keep on whacking on that makeup and those heels, girl, because we've got important messages to put out there.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for talking to us for this Power podcast, and hope to see you on a stage very soon.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for having me and for chatting. It's been really lovely.
Heather Duster, you are beautiful. Thank you.
So my name is Lola Rose. I am a female drag queen. I live in London. I'm a singer. I'm a lip syncer, and I found drag through my visceral need to be on a stage. And it kind of found me as well.
And how do you define drag queen?
To me, a drag queen is just a performer, really. A lot of people describe themselves as like glamour clowns and that sort of thing. I just think if you have, as a queer person, if you have a statement to make and you have a message you want to get across and you want to make people laugh, you want to make people cry, and that medium can be packaged into a 3-minute number, then that's drag to me.
Totally agree with you. Do you think it's necessary to gender define a drag queen?
I really don't think so. I don't think it's necessary to gender define at all. I was at Lip Sync 1000 last night, and the winner is a drag performer called PMBC, and they were drag king in the face, but had a female's body, and it was absolutely brilliant. It was completely just blurring the lines, and I think it's so essential. I think it's the future.
I agree completely. Lots of people I've spoken to with this podcast have been talking about drag thing instead of drag king. And which terms do you feel comfortable with, like bio queen, AFAB? How do you feel about those terms? I
call myself a queen just because it fits with how I perform. I've been trying to not use terms like AFAB recently, and not put so much emphasis on your body parts for doing drag. I think AFAB kind of reduces people to their genitals, and I think that can be quite dangerous. I've been saying this quite a lot, that I think as cis people like myself, we need to take that out of our vocabulary because it's to define trans people, and I think it's a bit of tricky ground. So I've just been calling myself a queen and a performer, and that's how I identify best.
Nice one. It is an interesting time with language, isn't it? It's like we're all learning a lot, and I think this time of communication it's really vital. That's kind of why I wanted to do this podcast, just to be like, hey, this is where we're at the end of 2021, and I may listen back to this and go, hey, that those guys were on a journey and learning at that point, and that's okay too. It's like if you're respectful and you're learning as you go, and it's such a beautiful scene, isn't it? Or at least the kind of alternative side of it.
Yeah, I used to refer to myself as an AFAB performer probably for the majority of the time I was doing drag regularly. And then recently I've heard a lot of trans men talking about how they don't like that term being used. And I thought they're so right. We stopped saying bio queen a few years ago because it came off as misogynistic. And then a few years later, we replaced it with the same thing. Yeah, I think language is always constantly evolving, and terms to describe yourself are constantly evolving. And if we just keep moving with the times, I think that's the best way to approach it.
I agree completely. Is it a level playing field for, now I'm interested, I was about to say female drag queens, but really what we're talking about here is non-cis male performers.
Yeah, it's not a level playing field. I was very lucky in that I've only experienced 2 outright incidences of misogyny while doing it, but I can't help but look. It's kind of crazy to see people step on the scene after me, do gigs that we were booked together for, and I was higher on the lineup than them, and they were just starting out, and which is obviously amazing. And then fast forward a year and a half, and they're doing all this amazing stuff, and there's people like other women who do drag who are still kind of ticking along where they were, because the trajectory when you're just a white man who does drag and kicks around to Ariana Grande is like that. And when you are anything else, it's not as easy to gain traction in your drag performance career. And it's so frustrating.
Yeah, I hear you. And I'm hearing this from everyone I speak to. And also on that note, I'll be honest, I found it more difficult to find female drag queens of colour.
No, I've noticed that as well. I was going to do a project where I went and recreated a bunch of female drag queens' faces, and I never got around to it, but I was trying to find more women of colour who do it, and I only could find one or two. And I've been in the scene for a while, and one or two that I knew identified as drag queens. There's a lot of women of colour who perform in cabaret circuits and stuff, but obviously you don't want to put any labels on anyone else. But yeah, I find that as well.
Yeah, so I spoke to Cassie from Cocoa Butter Club, who we work with a lot, and she told me about you, and I got really excited and followed you. And then I did, like, once Victoria Scone was announced on Drag Race, like I did lots of stories on my Instagram about it, and I was just saying, hey, can everyone tell me more about, you know, who else is in the scene that I don't know about? I've sort of like, is there, who else do I need to know about? But yeah, even from the research I've done for this podcast, I was like, this is too white a space. Like, we just, how, and on that note, like how can we make it, well, more level for women and also for people of color? Like, what can be done, and how can people support the scene?
I think it's just about creating spaces and opportunities to get involved. So my first show was a open mic night called Bar Whatever. It's in Royal Vauxhall Tavern. It's amazing. It's literally just whatever you want to do, show up, you've got 5 minutes, make it count. And I think from what I've seen, they have quite a lot of diversity in their performers, because it's just saying come as you are. Whereas, I think some competitions have quite high levels of that you need to do a lot to get in, or other open mics you need to be friendly with the people that run it, which is fine. But I just think if there's a lot of opportunities to get involved, then it's easier to get a more diverse range of people involved.
Yeah. And they can actually understand, like, that's how you get involved. You just turn up and you've got 5 minutes. That's really good to hear, actually, because yeah, it can be a bit in-house, can't it? And it's like, oh, who do you know? And if you're only booking your mates, it's dangerous ground.
No one. And even now, I've got like a handful of mates, but I don't know everyone. Like I couldn't be like, oh yeah, this I can get on this lineup easy, I'll just DM this person. Like, no, you still have to kind of hustle.
Yeah, and even more so as a non-cis white man. So a massive respect to you. I can't wait to see you perform somewhere.
The reason why I've had to take a step back from drag recently is because I've got a day job, and with the hours, there's not enough time to put in the background work of being a woman who does drag. So before, I'd spend a lot of time researching places, emailing people, applying to open mics, working on content, just to get on the, like, try and get to the next level as the other people who perform or on. And now I don't have the time to put that much emotional investment into it. So I've just taken a, hopefully temporary, step back so I can just reevaluate a bit. And yeah, it's just, I think it's quite different. I'm not sure if that's the same for my cis counterparts, cis male counterparts, but yeah.
How can people listening to this support the movement so it becomes more level?
I think following people, interacting with their Instagrams, interacting with their social media accounts, going to their shows, complimenting them, giving them a reason to keep doing it, telling your friends to come and visit the shows as well. Being really vocal, I think, is the main thing, and vocal about how not everyone is on the same level playing field, like just getting behind the movement.
And how do they find them to start with? Because that was almost what and I'm in the scene and I still slightly struggle to find everyone. So is there certain hashtags people should look at? Like, how do they support this movement?
Yeah. Before, I would say the AFAB Queen hashtag on Instagram has obviously probably the best resource, place to find people. Still might be. I think you just kind of have to get out there, I guess. It's all, we're hiding in plain sight.
Thing, yeah. It's kind of like, we need to, maybe this podcast could be part of that, like finding a term that where we can all kind of group together and say, hey, there's a crew of us, like we've got each other's back. It's new, and that's what's so exciting. And everyone I speak to, it's sort of like, it feels like we're next, like it has to be, and I think people will come to realize, like, oh, we've really overlooked these people.
It's been so exciting seeing women who do drag in these like more mainstream channels. So obviously Victoria on Drag Race, which is amazing. And then Sigourney Beaver on Dragula. So exciting, and like just seeing like bodies that look like mine on these huge platforms and hearing people talk about it and then coming to the conclusion, oh yeah, whatever, which is really the main thing I want to hear. I never want to hear you are valid. I just want to hear like, yeah, I enjoyed what you did.
Yeah, exactly. And just be equal. You know, this is the whole mission of feminism. It's like just be equal. And it's totally the same in drag. I'm really, really grateful for your wisdom on this, because it's like we're all living it, right? And this is your lived experience of it. And for the final question, I wanted to ask you what your dream future of the drag scene would look like.
Oh, I would love to see more kings. I love a drag king. I want to see a ton more women who do drag that aren't just, as much as I love a burlesque performer, I feel like women in drag gets kind of shoehorned into burlesque quite often. So burlesque performers and everything else. I want to see women winning competitions. I want to see women hosting. I want to see just women having all of the opportunities that everyone else is afforded.
I'm really grateful for your time. Thank you so much.
I'm Jody Mitchell, aka John Travolva, and my journey to drag, I haven't really met anyone else that had a similar journey to drag as me, because I didn't start off with the intention of doing drag. I started off with the intention of doing improv comedy and not being talked over. And so I've been doing improv for, I guess, a couple of years. And then the directors at the time of my drag family, Peck's Drag Kings, happened to see me in an improv show and asked me if I wanted to come and essentially like try out to be the compere for a show that they were doing at the time called the 80s Show, which was like I guess it was an amalgamation of different 80s icons, and they were making it at the time where like a lot of those icons had recently passed away. So I went and did this sort of trial show with them and instantly fell in love with it. But I didn't realize I'd been doing drag for years, really, without even noticing, because I was told for a long time when I was trying to get into this like very established improv troupe that I wasn't confident enough. And I didn't understand what that meant at all, because I'm very confident. I would say I'm not like an immodest person, but I know that I'm funny, and I know that I'm good at comedy, and I'm a stand-up comedian as well. And that's my day job. I do stand-up comedy, and then I do drag alongside it. So when I was trying to get in, they kept saying, you're not confident. You know, in a scene, you need to have gravitas, you need to have confidence. I was so confused. And then one day I started to do what could be perceived as more masculine accents and mannerisms, and it was instant. I was told I was confident. Everyone stopped talking over me. I could take up space in scenes. I could walk in and command the space and decide what direction that scene was going to go in. And I'd known that it was an issue. You know, you do notice when people talk over you all the time. You notice when you're not getting to choose the direction a scene goes in. You have an idea in your head. But it was so stark that all I had to do was walk on and be like, what are we doing here, lads? And everyone just fell into line, that I never looked back from it. I was like, okay, this is how I get to do my comedy. It's by taking up this masculine space. And then once I started to do drag, it was like a whole other level. And it's changed the way I walk through the world. You know, it really affirmed so many things about my own gender identity. And it sped up this process of self-acceptance and gender processing for me so much. But I'm just very lucky. I'm lucky that someone came and saw that show and was like, you're basically doing drag already. Do you want to put a beard on? And that my family guided me through that process. And now John Travolva is alive and well and gigging all the time. So that was my process. It was quite a weird way into it.
Incredible. Can you tell us more about your PEX crew then?
Yeah, so PEX, we're a group of, I think there's about 8 performers, a couple of incredible producers. And our shows are essentially about like deconstructing gender, which is what all drag should be. But because they are sort of long form narrative theatre, cabaret, fusion shows, there's a lot more space for us to explore what gender is for different people. And there's space for us to explore this concept of masculinity being for everyone, and PEX is very much a space where you can have this almost, I guess, like the perfect idea of what masculinity could be in this good, decent world that we'd like to create for people. It's about celebrating masculinity for people that aren't men. And it's about celebrating a version of masculinity that isn't toxic and that is sexy and celebratory and beautiful and kind, and really, really hot. Obviously, that's a big important part of it as well.
About femininity through that as well. About what?
Yeah, because a lot of our performers, identify as femme people or women, cis women, and it is about being able to take up space for them, and that's so vital. Like I've never sat comfortably with this idea of gatekeeping drag. Drag is for everyone, and the women that are in my drag troupe, their lives have been changed by drag. They have said, like, I walk through the world differently. I'm more confident. I can walk down the street and not move out of the way for men because I know that it's okay to take up space in this way. I think everyone should have that experience.
There's so much to talk about. Do you think it's like necessary to gender define drag? I mean, it's interesting. I've spoken to loads of people for this, and they're using the term drag thing as well as drag king, and as well as drag queen, obviously. And we know so much about queens through Drag Race, and that's become mainstream. But drag kings, it's a relatively underground thing, right?
Yeah, drag kings is it's hard because I'm going to try. I could rattle on about this for so long. But I think to speak succinctly on it, there's two platforms for drag kings. There's like the actual live performance drag scene where drag kings are very present. They're an integral part of the scene. They're stunningly talented. People acknowledge that. They want to book them. Drag kings are so present, and such an important part of drag culture. And then there's the more corporate scene where which is at the moment like very gatekept by RuPaul's Drag Race, where drag kings are so much less present. I've been really interested watching this shift with Drag Race as well, because now we have had our first like woman drag queen on RuPaul's Drag Race, Victoria Scone, paving the way, and there have been other like trans performers who weren't assigned male at birth now, and obviously there are trans women that compete on RuPaul's Drag Race, and yet drag kings are not allowed, even though a lot of the drag that we see on Drag Race is actually very gender fluid. It's much more like gender clowny. It's not, when Drag Race started, it was very much, my perspective on it was like a lot of the criticism they get is if they don't look as though they could quote unquote pass as a woman. And anyone that could pass as a cis woman would be praised out of Ru's asshole for doing that. And now it's become much more about what drag always should be, which is gender clowning. It's just aesthetic gender clowning. It's just processing gender on stage in a way that people enjoy. And so I find it really weird that there's still this distinction that we make where we're like, but not drag kings and not drag things. And I wonder if the next step will be like, oh, space for a drag thing who wasn't assigned male at birth. Maybe that will be the next step. But it's a weird distinction. And because of that, there isn't this space on the corporate scene for drag kings as much, because it's very led by drag queens that have had TV airtime. And that sits very uncomfortably with me, because that's not what drag is. And it's definitely not what the scene is. And it's so important that drag doesn't lose sight of what it's there for, because it's there for community and representation and catharsis and joy. And when you start excluding members of the queer community from that, that's not drag anymore. That's just corporate pride. So I'm hoping that the good work that RuPaul's Drag Race has done in making drag more mainstream and, showing people that there is this whole other world where they can explore and be celebratory doesn't stop where it's got to. I'm hoping this is just the beginning of it, and it makes all drag more accessible to people, but it doesn't make them behave in a mainstream way. It's like it should be accessible, shouldn't be mainstream, because once it's mainstream, it has to be a certain thing. So hopefully it keeps its beautiful fluidity.
Well, it's a long, slow road, isn't it? Sadly, it's not going to happen really overnight. But as we know through the underground queer scene, with the great sort of drag that we've been around, that you can change people's minds. You can literally open their minds on that dance floor and in those club environments and on stages. So hopefully, do you feel like there's a parallel with how we can see society changing? I mean, we know the patriarchy runs deep in all aspects of everything in the whole bloody world. But do you feel like with these shifts, you know, for example, as you said, you know, the space that you can now take up in the world because of doing drag, that hopefully audience members can take from that, and that we can shift the way the patriarchy runs so deep in everything else eventually? I'm trying to be optimistic, and we know it's imbalanced.
Gotta hold the optimism, otherwise you'd cry, wouldn't you?
Yeah, right.
I hope so. I hope that that's the work that drag kinging can slowly do more and more and more, because every time that I do a show with Pecs, we have people come to that show that wouldn't be the audience that you'd assume would come to that show. You know, we have a lot of gay men come to our shows. We have a lot of cis straight people come to our shows, and they all love it because they're all reflected in it, because the show is about, you know, it is about men being able to be feminine as well in a lot of ways. Like a lot of our masculinity that we show in like our very utopian shows is quite feminine masculinity, or it's about being able to take up space in either a feminine or masculine way, no matter what your gender is. And so everyone that comes to the show, I think, feels quite seen by it, and it's very cathartic for everyone. And I've had lots of conversations with straight men that have come to the show afterwards that have been like, I've never thought to myself that my gender is performative, and I've realized that it is. And actually now I'm thinking to myself, do I want to dress like this? Do I want to like always do this in the mornings? Like, why do I respond to people in this way? And obviously that's very, on the one hand, it's very funny to space hold for people after a show when you are just a performer. I'm not a therapist and I could arguably do quite a lot of damage. But it is beautiful as well to see people have that moment of realization that we have all just been programmed by society to behave in a certain way. We've been programmed to expect that we should always look a certain way. And obviously drag is about so much more than just clothes. It's about behavior and it's about emotion. But I think that's where it starts in the most obvious way, is being like, why do I feel like I have to dress like this? And for me, I dress like a very boring man in my day-to-day life. You know, I don't think that drag has to bring people this like euphoric moment of like, oh, I want to walk through life as like a beautiful rainbow Jesus, much as I feel joy for the people that do want to dress like a beautiful rainbow Jesus. It's just that moment of being like, I'm valid no matter what I am, but I get to decide what I am, or I get to know what I am and actually action that in my life. And I've seen all different types of people have realizations like that after a show. And that's why I want drag kings to be platformed more, because I love drag queens, but I think a lot of drag queen work on the scene is still about like, oh, women are so silly. Look at me pretending to be a silly, stupid woman. Women are stupid, but I'm also hot. Oh, I'm so great because I'm a thin woman. And that stuff is toxic, you know, and it's good in a way because it's emancipating for that particular performer that's processing whatever stuff they have going on. But it's not necessarily that safe to put on stage. And it's definitely not putting two fingers up at the patriarchy, because in a lot of ways it's just solidifying a lot of the bad things that the patriarchy does. So yes, more drag kings and things, and drag queens that have thought about their acts, please, world.
Thank you so much for your eloquence on that, because this sort of aesthetic gender clowning that you speak about is so groundbreaking, and it can free the men as well as the women. It's like, that is, you know, we know all gender is performative, and that is what has to be next. Like, surely we're going to get tired with what the mainstream is seeing as this like groundbreaking thing because it's new to them when they see Drag Race. you know, to the rest of us, it's so tired and yeah, like you say, toxic, that men need it as much as women and non-binary people need it. We got to free them so that in turn they can free us. It's like a sort of a beautiful circle once that does start to happen, that I can't wait to see happen. I think you're leading the way, love. Like, I think it's so incredible what you do. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, mate. That's so sweet of you. We've just all got to pitch in together, haven't we?
It means a lot, honestly. Just to sort of close, like, I mean, it's a podcast, so I could talk to you forever, but we've got like quite a few. In fact, Victoria Scone is in it as well, and Chio, and there's some really interesting voices in it.
Oh, I love Chio so much.
Oh my God, Chio had some really interesting things to say actually about. Chio was talking about AFAB meaning to them assumed female at birth.
Yeah, I like that.
That's a really nice like twist on it, because even like, you know, in fact we can talk about the term AFAB and how you feel about it, because, you know, it's a medical term. Yeah, I'll let you talk.
No, I've the thing is with like AFAB and AMAB as labels, like they are useful up to an extent when you're talking in like a more generalized way about trends in the community. Like it is important to be able to be like AFAB performers are underrepresented, because that is the core issue. But it's interesting when people take it a step further and it becomes talking about like individual performers. And I'm hoping we continue to move away from it, because now that there are more and more people that are identifying as non-binary, which I do, like my pronouns are they, them. I've identified as non-binary for a while. I find it really useful to be able to talk about like marginalization that I've experienced in quite a practical way. So I can be like, because I am AFAB, I haven't been platformed by these people because I've noticed it as a pattern, blah, blah, blah. But you do encounter people that will be like, that will literally say like, oh, are you an AFAB drag performer? And it's like, well, that's not the point. And also you shouldn't really ask, you know? So it's an interesting one. And it's not a new thing, but it's new for it to be a dialogue that more people are having. So the optimist in me hopes that there'll just continue to be nuance around it. But the pessimist in me is buckling up for quite a long ride, I guess. Especially in drag spaces, I think there are a lot of drag kings and things that would feel actively uncomfortable, people asking them to like label themselves in what is, I guess AMAB and AFAB are not technically gendered, but they are sexed terms. So yeah, it's all about consent. It's like if someone is telling you that they're comfortable using a term, then great, go ahead and use it. But yeah, there's a way to go, I think.
Totally. Even like when I'm thinking about how I'm going to promote this podcast and what language I'll use, because essentially it was inspired by a conversation that we had as part of last year's festival with Ginny and Bimini and Titi, and they were talking about the misogyny in the drag scene. So I was like, oh, it would be really good to focus on non-cis male performers as a further thing, which is why I'm doing this podcast. And even that description, it's like, well, at first I was like, oh, female drag queens. And I was like, well, I've got to include kings. And it's like, well, all the creatures as well. And it's like everyone who's a drag thing and a creature of the night, I want to be involved. So it keeps kind of growing arms and legs. But yeah, even like the language around how I describe that this is a podcast focusing on drag queens that aren't cis men in drag. Is that rude? Will I be offending someone then? So I'm checking the way that I word it even out loud now.
I guess it's just all a process, isn't it? We definitely, because I run a night in London that doesn't, essentially is a comedy night that doesn't have cis men on, right? But the wording of it is like, the LOL word is a queer collective of women, trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming performers. And I feel like it's quite normalized to have that fear of like, oh, it's long, it's clunky, like who am I excluding? But it's also just part of an ongoing conversation. And hopefully we'll reach a point at some point where we feel more social discomfort at the idea of labeling something incorrectly than we do at the idea of something being like slightly longer.
Yes.
Because there are lots of examples where things are slightly longer names so that it's not mislabeled, but we just haven't clocked it because it's not queer, it's not an event that's othered already. So hopefully we eventually get there. But yeah, of course it's that thing of like, have I learned enough about this? Am I missing something?
Yeah.
But yeah, we're all just learning.
I think this is a perfect kind of way to end this conversation, because I think we have to take that narrative going forward, because we're not going to answer everything in this podcast, but we're definitely going to increase the conversation around there being other people that do drag that aren't necessarily the ones that you see on the telly, in terms of in the mainstream culture of it. And on that note, how can people support the movement so it can become more level?
I honestly think that there are two things people can do. I think if you're aware that you have more power, or you are more of a gatekeeper in terms of platforming more diverse performers, make an effort, because you still see drag queen lineups that are all white. Mm-hmm. And that's so basic. At this point, I'm like, that's so basic. Like, why are you not having on more performers of color? And you still see drag lineups that don't have a single king on it. You still see drag lineups that are all cis people. You still see drag lineups that don't have any drag things, or you see drag lineups that only have those kind of acts that are actually punching down at women. And so I think if you're a booker or you're someone that's putting on an event, make the effort to educate yourself, or acknowledge that you have educated yourself and you're just being lazy and you're just trying to make money, and acknowledge that maybe it's your internal bias that's telling you that you can't make money on a night that platforms these other performers who actually are very established and very talented, or not established and haven't been given a chance and are very talented.
Difference, right? And there's a whole audience that don't know about you yet. So until you showcase
exactly.
How can the audience love you until they've seen you? It's a sort of chicken and egg.
Yeah, and the audience will love it. And also maybe your audience should change. If your audience is only one specific type of drag fan, is that right? That's not what drag is about. So do better. That's my message to people that are gatekeeping. And then to people that are just looking to go out and watch drag, just look up what your local king nights are, or just check out all of the different stuff that's going on. I only really know the London scene of drag in terms of like where I've performed, but I've looked up the drag scene in like other places so that I can learn more about people that are performing there, and so that I can go to their nights if I'm ever gigging in the area. And that's just important to do. Just don't be lazy about stuff, I guess, is my message to people. I know it's hard and we all lack spoons and we've lived through a pandemic, and I'm not telling anyone to hate on themselves if they can't be bothered to do some social media searching today. Have a cup of tea and a nap. But when you've got the spoons, spend them wisely and go and see drag that is what drag actually is. Don't go and see drag that is just what you've seen on telly recreated on stage.
I am so grateful to have your voice to be part of this. So the final question I've been asking people is, what would your dream future of the drag scene look like? So kind of, you talk about this utopia already, which I love. Yeah, what does that look like and feel like?
I think what it would be for me is just the freedom to make the art that I'm already making without the exhaustion of having to argue for its validity all the time, and the ability to see all of the people that I already perform alongside who are amazing, talented kings flourish and blossom, and not having to deal with that stuff either, because it's such a battle, and even when you are already very established and are doing very well, Pecs is doing very well. You get quite a lot of like criticism or like microaggressions from other performers about it, because they just assume that as a king you couldn't possibly be established or have a following, and that doesn't particularly faze me. I find it quite funny, but I know that it does faze other people. And so my utopian vision of the future is just like being able to take up space and being able to see the next wave of performers that come through, because I'm saying I'd love to see all of the like amazing diverse performers that I know do well, but I'm like, there's definitely stuff that we're missing. You know, like disability access in drag is terrible because the drag scene is so underfunded. We're performing in basements. They're not accessible at all. So I feel like that's the next thing to really focus on, or something we should be focusing on already. Just like being able to make drag visible and have it actually represent the diverse reality of the world that we live in. I feel like it is achievable if people stop being assholes. It will happen.
Yes. Thank you, John Travolva.
Thank you for joining us as we welcomed in such exciting performers from the UK drag scene today. We spoke to as many performers as we could, and I've saved highlights on my Instagram stories at Miss Amy Zing, where I'm gathering, saving and asking to hear of more queens and kings, so please tag anyone we've missed. This is the beginning of the rise of this more gender diverse vision of drag, and we want to nurture and celebrate the whole scene. So let's keep the conversation going. There is space for everyone in drag. That is the point. So if it's something you want to get into, these podcasts hold some fantastic tips of places to go and people to follow and ways to find your communities. Thank you to everyone that spoke to us. It's utterly fascinating to find out about the power of drag and the journey these performers have gone on to get to where they are today. I mean, you've got to be thick-skinned to really handle that scene, I'm telling you. So thank you to all of you for listening, to our producer, Darren Della Soul, for her patience, as I kept saying, one more queen, sorry. And to everyone tearing up the rule book and using the stage to open minds. It's in those venues, watching these performances, that change is happening. So keep doing what you're doing, and everyone get out there and support your local performance scene. I truly believe that great performance can change the world, and this lot are doing exactly that. It's an honour to have had you all on the Power of Women podcast. Thank you, and I'll see you in a club soon.
Power of Women podcast. Power of Women podcast.